Let's talk about pelvic floor awareness. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Sydney. I'm a perinatal athletic therapist and postnatal fitness specialist. And today we are going to dive into bringing awareness to our pelvic floor. We're going to go through a couple simple exercises that you can use, and we're going to talk about the anatomy of the pelvic floor as well. This is a picture of our pelvic floor. How many of you have seen a picture that looks like this, that shows you all of the muscles of the pelvic floor? It's okay if you haven't. Many of us haven't seen this. Many of us don't know what the pelvic floor muscles actually look like. What many people don't realize is that the pelvic floor muscles contract and relax like every single other group of muscles in the body. However, their function is slightly different. The pelvic floor muscles have 5 functions, and we often think about these functions as the 5 S's of the pelvic floor: support, sphincteric, stability, sexual, and sump pump. The first one is support. The pelvic floor muscles actually support all of the pelvic organs against gravity. So they essentially lift all of the pelvic organs up so that they're not falling out the bottom of our pelvis. The second function is sphincteric. We have sphincters on the internal and external aspect of our anus and our urethra to control our bowel movements and our urine. The third one is stability. The pelvic floor muscles are actually part of our core, which we're going to dive into a little bit more today. The pelvic floor muscles are very close to the hip muscles, the pelvic muscles, and they work along with the core muscles to stabilize our back. They do a ton of work in terms of stability. The fourth function is sexual. There are specific muscles of the pelvic floor that help with arousal and pleasure during intimacy. And the fifth function is sump pump or circulation. The muscles of the pelvic floor actually help to push blood back up to the heart out of the pelvis to allow the circulation to continue. So now we know what the pelvic floor looks like, we know what it does, but now we need to talk about how it works. There are a few different techniques that I like to use to get people to be a little bit more aware of their pelvic floor. The first one is going to be relaxation, the second one is going to be activation, and the third one is going to be excessive pressure or excessive intra-abdominal pressure. For this first exercise, we're going to start on our back. Like I said, if you can't feel it the first time, don't worry. I have a couple different techniques that we can use. So start by lying on your back. What I want you to do is spread your legs a bit more than hip width apart and take some deep belly breaths into your lower abdomen. What you should be feeling here is your pelvic floor almost like flowering out or blooming. There will be a little bit of pressure on your pelvic floor, but it shouldn't be uncomfortable. If you can't feel it here, we're going to move to bringing our legs up into almost like a birthing position, but make sure that they're nice and relaxed out to the side. Again, you're going to take a nice deep breath into your lower abdomen, and you should feel a little bit of pressure going downwards into your pelvic floor. If you're having trouble feeling it in either of those two ways, this is a different way that you can try. Sit with your legs out to the side, and what you're going to do, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but pull your butt cheeks out from underneath your sit bones or your ischial tuberosities. Now your pelvic bones have been rolled forward a little bit, so your pelvic floor is actually almost directly on the surface that you're sitting on. Again, I want you to take a nice deep belly breath, and you should feel your pelvic floor descend or push down into the surface that you're sitting on. If that doesn't work for you, you can try this technique instead. Find a chair or stool, and we're going to do the same thing. Pull your butt cheeks out from underneath your sit bones, And even rock your pelvis forward just a little bit. Now take another nice deep breath into your lower abdomen. And you should feel that pressure going downwards into the chair. I have one more technique that you can use if the other ones didn't work for you. Take something like a foam roller or something about this size. You're going to sit on your shin bones and you're actually going to put the foam roller underneath your pelvis. And you're going to do the same thing in this position. Take a nice deep belly breath. Did you feel it that time? So that is pelvic floor relaxation. Like I said before, our pelvic floor muscles work just like any other muscles in the body. So you have to be able to relax them before you can activate them again. Imagine doing a bicep curl and not relaxing after, and then thinking, I'm going to do another bicep curl. If you haven't relaxed in between, you're not going to be able to activate again. So now we've talked about pelvic floor relaxation. Let's talk about activation. You think about holding in your pee, holding in a fart, stopping yourself from going to the bathroom. Those are all ways that we can activate our pelvic floor, or a Kegel. We want to think of a Kegel as in lifting up of the pelvic floor and activating those muscles tightly together. Like I mentioned earlier, our pelvic floor muscles partake in the stability of our entire core. Our pelvic floor muscles actually contract and relax at the same time as our deepest core muscle called the transverse abdominis. Transverse abdominis activates by cinching our waist like a corset. And I'm going to show you how we can feel that today when we activate our pelvic floor. For this one, we're going to go back onto our back. We're going to start with our legs about hip width apart. And what I want you to do is actually start with your hands on your abdomen just below your ribs. And I want you to kind of push into your abdomen just a little bit. What we're going to do here is take a nice deep breath into our lower abdomen, just like we did before, to allow our pelvic floor to relax. And on our exhale, we're going to do a Kegel. What you should feel underneath your fingers is an activation or a cinching of that corset muscle. Let's do it in a seated position now. Hands just underneath the ribs. We're going to take a nice deep breath in to allow the pelvic floor to relax. Exhale, we're going to Kegel. And what happens there is I can feel the activation of my transverse abdominis underneath my fingertips. That just goes to show you that your pelvic floor and your deep core muscles are actually connected to each other. There are many different ways to activate our pelvic floor, which we are not going to dive into today. The biggest thing I want you to recognize is after you've activated your pelvic floor, you need to be able to relax it. There are many different ways to activate our pelvic floor, which we are not going to dive into today. The biggest thing I want you to recognize is after you've activated your pelvic floor, you need to be able to relax it. The third type of awareness we're going to talk about is increased intra-abdominal pressure. This is a technique that I want to use just to make you more aware of what's happening to your pelvic floor when you cough or sneeze, when you're doing an activity that might be a little bit too intense for you. This way you can feel what happens in your pelvic floor when you're doing these different things. For this technique, you can sit on a chair, you can sit on the floor, or you can sit on a foam roller or whatever it was that you used in the relaxation technique. For this technique, I'm going to use a foam roller because that's the way that I most easily feel my pelvic floor relax or descend. For this technique, we're going to initiate something that is going to cause the pelvic floor to descend as it normally would if you increase your abdominal pressure. So for this technique, you can cough or sneeze. You can just pretend to cough or sneeze, or you can brace the top of your stomach as if I'm going to punch you in the stomach and feel what happens to the bottom of your pelvic floor. So you can cough, Or you can activate your core as if I'm going to punch you in the stomach. What you should feel there is your pelvic floor pushing downwards. This is different than the relaxation we were feeling before. The relaxation we were feeling is a slow push out or push downwards, maybe a blooming, however you'd like to describe it, versus this is a hard pushing down of the pelvic floor into whatever object it is that you're sitting on, because the pressure that's inside your abdomen is too high for your pelvic floor to be able to sustain. I hope that you are able to feel the relaxation, activation, and increased pressure and how that feels in your pelvic floor. If you are unable to feel any of these techniques, I would suggest checking in with a perinatal or pelvic specialized therapist so that you can have your pelvic floor and core muscles assessed and hopefully regain normal function. If you feel that you're now more aware of your pelvic floor, either in how it looks, what it does, or how it functions, please feel free to like this video or comment below and let me know how it went for you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to comment below or send me a message on Instagram. I would love to chat with you guys. Thanks for joining me in today's video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.